Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Amelie podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Puerto Escondido. We're still in Mexico. I'm going to be talking about my interesting journey to get to Puerto Escondido, talking about the worst hostel I ever stayed in, and also the gorgeous beaches and how safe it really is. Puerto Escondido was one of the longest stays we had in Mexico, or maybe even in our trip in general. We stayed there for about 8 days. Honestly, so beautiful, and the beaches are amazing, and there's so much to do there. It's also just an incredibly relaxing place to be. I mean, obviously you're by the sea, you're by the beach, there's loads of restaurants, you can have drinks, but I will say that the journey getting there was not relaxing and was not peaceful. The way people typically get from Oaxaca to Puerto Escondido is you get a 13 hour bus ride, and it sort of goes all through the mountains, and it's kind of crazy because when you look at how far away these places are from each other, they are not far at all. Previously there had been no direct route, so it was a long bus ride, and I think typically people would go for an overnight bus ride. But just as we were leaving Oaxaca, there was a new road that had just been built, just been opened, that created a 3-hour drive instead of this whole convoluted journey. So we booked that bus and thought, fine, it's going to take us 3 hours. We'll leave Oaxaca at 12 p.m. We'll get there at 3 p.m. Enough time to sort of settle into the hostel, go to the beach, do whatever, go out for a meal or something in the evening. Of course, just our luck, there was a protest going on at that time. I can't remember what it was about. I feel like it was about the new road. I think it had obviously destroyed some land or something, and people were obviously not happy about it. I, for some reason, went on Hostel World, which is an app where you can book hostels. I was just checking our reservation for Puerto Escondido, make sure that it had all gone through, it was all fine. And I see people talking on this group chat for Oaxaca saying, what's everyone doing about the protests? What's everyone doing about the bus cancellations? So we go obviously research it, try and see what's going on. We see there's the protest, and we sprint back to our hostel because we'd gone out for breakfast. We sprint back, and I'm trying to communicate with the hostel owner to say, can you phone the bus station, or is there any way you can find out if this is real? Because I don't know how reliable all these sources are. I don't know why we didn't, or like why I was questioning that, but I just remember being a bit like, this is a bit strange, a bit random. Like, if there's a protest, surely you can just go round the protest, there'll be no disruptions. It was just a bit strange to us. I think there was a bit of a language barrier and she didn't really understand what I was trying to ask, so we were like, that's fine, we'll just pack our bags now, check out early from our hostel, and we'll go to the bus station and see what's going on. We get to the bus station around 12 p.m, so midday. Our bus was meant to be about, I think, 1 p.m. We get to the bus station, go up to the desk, and obviously I'm asking these questions. Is the bus cancelled? Are there no buses? What's going on? And the desk woman says to me, yeah, there's no buses. There's nothing going on. There's complete protest. The road is completely blocked. And I'm thinking, okay, well, when are these protests due to end? Because if they're due to end in the next hour, for example, then we'll just get a bus an hour later. That's completely fine. She says no, all buses going to Puerto Escondido are completely cancelled. Like, every bus. Apart from the night buses. And the night buses were, our options were 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. to do the 13 hour journey instead of doing the 3-hour one. We just transferred our bus to the 9 p.m. one. We thought, there's nothing else we can do, so might as well just book a night bus. They're going to get full because obviously lots of people have now been stranded here and can't get to Puerto Escondido. There were so many people in the bus station, all just sort of looking a bit like headless chickens. Everyone was just running around, not really sure what to do. And I think this was our first sort of stress of our trip, so we didn't really know how to handle it, and we weren't really sure what was going on. Obviously there's also the language barrier, so you're thinking, I can't even communicate with some of these people properly to ask them the questions that I want to ask about our bus or our journey, or if there's any other transport. Is there another bus station? Can I get a taxi? Like, how is this going to work? So we've bought our bus ticket, our 9 p.m. ticket, but that is 9 hours away from the time we're at the bus station. And so we're thinking, great, we're going to have to sit here for 9 hours now. We've checked out of our hostel. There's nowhere else we can go. We've got our big backpacks. We've got all our stuff with us. And so we're sort of just prepping ourselves for a 9-hour day where we're just going to camp out at the bus station. Wasn't looking forward to it at all. Also, obviously, food is so much more expensive when you're at a bus station or an airport or whatever. Food wasn't really accessible. I think there are a few shops from what I remember down the road, but we didn't really know what was going on, so didn't have time to sort of go and buy some snacks or whatever. So we don't really know what to do. We're just sitting there trying to figure out, is there another way? Then we happened to bump into a couple that were also traveling and trying to get to Puerto Escondido, and they were meant to be on the same bus as us, and we ended up sitting together. We were sort of chatting about, you know, our trip and what we were doing in Mexico, and we eventually got to the fact that they were from Melbourne, which obviously for us was like, oh my God, we're flying to Melbourne in, I think at that point, 6 months' time, 5 months' time. We thought it was quite cool that we'd met people from Melbourne who could obviously tell us about Melbourne, you know, passing the time kind of thing. But they kept talking about wanting to get a taxi and doing the 3-hour taxi. That is very expensive, at least for us. Our budget was not going to allow a 3-hour taxi ride. I think also because somewhere like Oaxaca, it's quite a remote place. I kind of spoke about it in the Oaxaca episode, but taxis are going to be more expensive. I don't know what to call it. It's not remote because it can be quite touristy, but like taxis are not the cheapest because they're obviously the only mode of transport to get around. So they can charge you whatever. Eventually, after chatting to them for, I think, a few hours, maybe 2 hours or something, they decide to go and get a taxi out the front and try and get one that will take them the 3 hours to Puerto Escondido. We're obviously quite jealous because we want to get there as well. So if they find a taxi, we're thinking, well, shit, it would have been quite nice to get in the taxi with them. They actually turn around and say to us, why don't you just come in our taxi and just pay us the fare that you paid for the bus? We paid barely anything for the bus, and we thought that this was really, really generous of them considering how much it was going to cost them. But they said, obviously, we're doing the taxi, you might as well just get in with us. We're going the same way. So lucky and appreciated it so much. But as you can imagine, it was very difficult to get somebody to take you on a 3-hour taxi journey. That is not a normal ask, especially with the roads being blocked and that 3-hour road having protests on it. Not really ideal, and we weren't expecting taxi drivers to say yes. We got in one taxi. I tried to negotiate with him how much we had to pay for it. We get in the taxi and we say, okay, let's go. Like, we're all ready. We're all excited. We've all like put our bags in the back, seatbelts on. He drives a meter and turns around and goes, oh, you want to go to Puerto? Oh, no, I'm not taking you there. And I was like, but you just, what? You just said that you were going to, what? He was like, that's a 3-hour car journey. I'm not doing that because then I've got to come back and I'm not getting paid to come back. So we go to a different taxi driver and he says yes. And we had to keep confirming with him, you do understand where we're trying to go. Please don't take us to a different bus station or somewhere else, or also just randomly drop us in the desert. That obviously wouldn't be ideal. We get in this taxi. There are 5 of us altogether, including the driver, obviously. The taxi is tiny, absolutely tiny. Bearing in mind, we also don't know these people, so like personal space is just not a thing. Like, we had to just let our guard down, all squished into this taxi. We're all so excited because we can finally get to Puerto. We weren't thinking about the fact that we're gonna have to sit in this car in 28-degree heat for 3 hours. Anyway, we get in the hot, sweaty car, we're driving off, and we do the 3-hour drive. And it was actually fine. It was really nice. We obviously chatted the whole way, and it was nice to get to know other people that were traveling, obviously from Melbourne, like I said. But after the 3-hour hot, sweaty car ride, we got out the car, dropped them off at their place or their Airbnb, wherever they were staying. We were dropped off at the same place, and we had to get a different taxi to our accommodation. But we paid them, said our goodbyes, see you soon, and we had finally arrived in Puerto Escondido. Puerto Escondido is typically known for its surfing culture. The waves are insane there, so if you are into surfing, 100% recommend going. You've got Playa Zicatela, which is where we stayed. We stayed near that beach. Then you've got Playa Carrizalillo, I don't know if I said that right. Playa Caritalillo, just Google it. And La Punta, which is, I would say, is where most of the backpackers go, is La Punta. I don't really know why. I have a feeling it's because it's more of a swimming beach, maybe, or like there's some waves there. It's not as strong as Zicatella. Zicatella is like quite aggressive waves. I would say if you're like a pro surfer, that's where you're going to go to surf. I don't know why La Punta is where all the backpackers go. I guess it's like a small, almost town on the beach. So there's a proper community vibe to it. We didn't stay there. We stayed in Zicatella, which was sort of the main strip and the main beach of Puerto. I do have to say that we didn't do really any excursions or anything whilst we were here because we were pretty happy just chilling on the beach. I really got into my reading, and beers were like 50p if you were sitting on the beach. So we just sort of took everything in, took time to sort of decompress, because also we knew of all the things that were coming next and all the things that we needed our energy for. So it was just a nice place to relax. It definitely felt a bit more like a holiday than backpacking. But for anyone who wants to know, obviously, what you can do in Puerto, they do things like surfing, snorkeling, you got paddle boarding, dolphin and whale tours, like boat tours. I think if we had the budget, we would have done things like that, but they were pretty expensive, which is why I say Puerto can maybe be seen as quite a touristy destination. It's definitely a lot more built up than what I'd read about it or heard about it. There was also a rumour that I don't know if it's a rumour, but it's something that we heard speaking to people, is that there's some scams that go on with some of the excursions or some of the touristy stuff. Things like you can release turtles into the water, and like obviously that's a really lovely thing to do and like a nice memory to make. But we had been told that some people will obviously release the turtles, go and catch them, and then continue that cycle of releasing them, catching them, releasing them. And it just didn't feel very ethical, obviously, for the animals. So we didn't really want to pay quite a bit of money to go and do that when it doesn't really feel authentic and morally just felt quite wrong. But I don't know if that's completely true. I don't want to, say like take my word for it, but it's just multiple people did say that to us. So I'm just relaying, obviously, that information. There's also such a party culture in Puerto. There's so many bars, so many places to go and get a drink, loads of clubs on the beachfront, which I think is obviously a really nice touch. And you would always see everyone, whilst we were walking back from the beach in the evening, you'd see everyone setting up the bars for clubs and getting DJs in, setting up equipment. So lots of drinking and other substances, I would say, if you get what I mean. So if that's something that you're into, I guess it's like the best place for it. Another thing to do in Puerto is go to the markets. They were closer to La Punta, which is down the beach from where we were staying. I think it was like an hour walk in the heat. We decided to do the walk at like midday, obviously when the sun is hottest. I don't know why we decided to do that. The markets are really, really cool. They've got loads of cool things that you can buy, but they were quite expensive. Well, if anything, expensive for our budget. But the things are really cool to go and see. They've got clothing shops, jewellery, you've got food stands, and it was nice to go and see them. And then also because it's very close to La Punta, you can go round the sort of mini town. I definitely would say they're worth a visit. I don't know if it's something I would recommend you do every day and like go multiple times. I think they're cool to see, and then you can sort of leave it. Now, moving on to food and drink, we actually cooked quite a lot when we were in Puerto because we ended up staying in this sort of studio apartment. It wasn't that much more expensive than staying in a hostel, and we had the place to ourselves. It was like a mini apartment, and we had a stove. So we would go down to the local shop that was on the corner of where we stayed, and you would get fresh tortillas and hot dogs and guacamole that's homemade and eggs, and it was obviously all a lot cheaper than going to the supermarket. But I would definitely recommend going to those local shops when you're in Puerto if you can find them. Usually they're corner stores because everything's homemade. You can buy all of your basic things. You've got meat. I think you could buy milk in some of them, just things that will keep you going, essentially. It's going to be way cheaper than going to the supermarkets because the supermarkets are quite American over there. So we did obviously go to the supermarket at times, but I just mean for like the basic things, it's so much cheaper. And obviously, who doesn't want homemade tortillas? Anyway, we would cook our meal and we would go and sit on the rooftop of our accommodation to watch sunset, and that was sort of our routine. We did go out, obviously, a few times. The restaurants along the front of Zicatela are so, so good. I think we went to one like 3 times or something. The food is so nice and it's relatively cheap. It's like similar to other places in Mexico in terms of pricing. What's nice is that you have some authentic Mexican food, but you can also get, you know, your pastas and things and pizzas and stuff like that if you really want. Funnily enough, we were actually there when the Super Bowl happened, and there were a lot of Americans on holiday at the time. So we went to one of these restaurants. I think we got pizza and like some wine, and we just watched the Super Bowl, and it was quite fun because we've never watched the Super Bowl properly. I usually just sort of tune into the halftime show, but it was nice to watch it, and you've got Americans around who are really passionate about it and really enthusiastic about it. So it was really cool to be in Puerto and watch the game. I think that also shows its sort of touristy side a bit, you know, the fact they were showing the game. I wouldn't say it's like some hidden place that no one knows about. And of course, so much mezcal because you're still in the Oaxacan region. So much mezcal, and at this point we had eventually learned to obviously sip it, not shot it. My hidden gems for Puerto Escondido are more little tricks, I guess, to maybe help you if you're on a budget. We didn't know that sun lounges on the beach were free. You just had to buy beers or food from the restaurants on the beach. I guess that sounds pretty normal, but in Mexico, the beers were 50p, maybe £1. So it's not like it's very expensive in comparison to when you might go away on holiday, go to America or something, or even in Spain or whatever, and you've got to pay either a day rate or per hour for a sun lounger. We thought that this was such a good trick. We didn't know that it was obviously going to be free. Everywhere we've been before, you had to pay some sort of fee to have a sun lounger. So the fact that these were all free technically was quite nice, and it meant that we could spend all day at the beach. We didn't have to worry about obviously getting kicked off, or that there was a certain time that we paid up until, and it was just very relaxing, really, really nice, and you're not sitting there stressing about being on these sun lounges. And I have to say, our accommodation was our hidden gem. It was probably one of the best places we stayed on our entire trip. It was called Casa Mura, and it was run by this guy and his mum. It was sort of a set of studio apartments in a like small apartment block, if you could even call it that, with the most gorgeous rooftop, perfect view of the sea and sunset. It wasn't that much more expensive than staying in a hostel. So, you know, if you're going to Puerto, I really recommend it. It was also 10 minutes away from the beach, so it was perfect for us. And the host was so, so, so lovely. He even drove us to the bank when we needed to get money out, and drove us to the bus station because, like I've said, taxis are quite expensive there. So he was like, I'll just give you a lift, which obviously on a budget you appreciate. And obviously you've got the sunsets in Puerto, which are not necessarily a hidden gem, but if you find a good spot to watch the sunset, which could even be on the beach, we would watch it quite a lot from the rooftop of our apartment complex, I guess. But we went one night to watch it on the beach, and it's honestly stunning. We didn't find any sunsets, I don't think, that matched it. It was absolutely unreal. Now for safety. I'm going to tell you about the most interesting and probably the worst hostel I ever stayed in. Before I get into it, I do want to say that Puerto felt generally quite safe. We didn't really feel any issues when you are by the beach. If you are on the hill in the main town, I would say that is where it feels less safe and maybe a bit more dodgy. In previous videos with Oaxaca and Mexico City, I commented on the police in those areas and those places. I don't really have much to say about the police. We didn't really see any police. We heard stories of people saying police had sort of targeted them or like followed them, chased them or whatever, but I don't know if that's just because that's something they were doing that wasn't right. As in, I don't know if it was the police targeting them or if they were just doing something stupid. I don't know. So I don't really have anything to say about the police in Puerto Escondido because We didn't really see any, didn't encounter any, and didn't really have any issues. But let's get on to our first night in Puerto Escondido in the worst hostel I've ever stayed in. To give a bit of context, let's go back to the fact that we had just spent 3 hours in a hot, sweaty taxi trying to get to our destination after having a very stressful morning and not thinking that we were going to get there until probably 24 hours later. We turned up at our hostel and it's very, very hot. Like, we have just sat, and obviously, like I've said, it was sweaty, but the heat doesn't alleviate when you get out of the car. It is still extremely hot at this time of year. We go in and the first red flag is that our room doesn't lock. We are extremely tired. We are not in any frame of mind to be chilled about this. I think tensions were very high because you're hot, sweaty, haven't had a shower, and you're starving. Like I said, we didn't have any snacks. The hostel owners come in and we obviously say our room doesn't lock, and they are completely stoned out of their mind. And I don't have an issue with that. Neither of us had an issue with that. That's not, I don't really care. But when you're in charge of the hostel and our room isn't locking, I'm feeling a bit unsafe. They then say, we will look after your bags. Like, we'll watch them. You guys go out and get food. We'll keep the bags in the room. We'll look out for them. It's fine. No one's going to come in and take your stuff. Yeah, I don't really feel that comfortable doing that, considering I had things like my iPad in my bag and obviously all of our clothes. Passport and stuff we always kept on us, so that wasn't necessarily a worry, but everything else we had brought with us was going to be left in this room, which we weren't comfortable with at all. They were almost immobile, I think, because they were so high. They moved very slowly and just weren't alert. Then they were also just too stoned to even find the key. They were rattling around in this box for probably 10-20 minutes, trying to find the right key for our room. They tried to tell us that the door locks by locking the door when it's open, and then you have to slam the door and that's locked. And they did that, and obviously I'm thinking, okay, that's fine, but we don't have a key to get back in now. So you've just locked all of our bags in this room. Wasn't really ideal, obviously. So we ended up swapping rooms because they found a key for a door or for this room that was going to lock. But this room was in the middle of the lobby, I guess, or like the reception area. So we had our door that did lock now, but we had a massive window that looked into the reception, into the lobby, so people could see into our room with a very, very thin see-through curtain covering the window, and that didn't lock. So we're thinking, okay, I mean, it's better that the door locks. I don't think people would go for the window, but just like, why? Like, what? What? In the end, we just said, fuck it, we need to go and get food, and we need to just leave our stuff here, and we'll just have to hope for the best. We're not going to be out for very long. We'll just pick up some tacos or something, come back and eat them in the room. We're going around the neighboring shops, and this is in the town, so on the hill of Puerto Escondido, which is not where people typically stay, which we eventually obviously find out why. We're going around all these shops and restaurants and nothing is open, and it's 8 p.m. And we're thinking this is very, very strange because obviously this is dinner time, unless they have dinner very late here or something. I don't know. Nothing is open. Eventually, we've walked down so many dodgy streets where people are looking at us because we're also holding our phones to do Google Maps and try and find some restaurants or somewhere, a supermarket to go to. I really hated having our phones out in places like this because it really makes you stand out as if we already didn't stand out because we look like backpackers, and it just always made me really, really uncomfortable. Eventually, on our way back, because we've just given up trying to find food and we've just thought, okay, we'll have to just go out in the morning, we find this tiny restaurant that is cooking some tacos or burritos, pick some up, and we just go back to our room thinking, what the fuck has today been? I'm going to wash my hands after going to the bathroom, and there are dead cockroaches in our sink. Just like lying. I don't even know how they died. Anyway, all of the owners of this hostel are high out of their mind, which, like I said, don't usually care, but the fact that they are meant to be in charge and making sure that everything's safe and sort of taking responsibility, you know, you're running this hostel, I just felt extremely, extremely unsafe, and I think we both felt extremely unsettled. But we have to spend the night because by this point, when we've eaten all our food, it's 10 p.m. and there's nowhere else we can go. We don't really have the energy to go and travel to a new place or try and find a new place. So we try and get to sleep and try and get an early night. We're exhausted and we're thinking tomorrow we'll probably just find somewhere else or we'll stick it out. If we sleep well tonight, then that's fine and we'll just leave it. The entire night, there is loud music, shouting, dogs barking, and dogs scratching on our door. It was such a restless night and it was just so horrible. We just couldn't sleep at all. And we'd stayed at a hostel before in Oaxaca and this was not what it was like at all. Everybody was very respectful of noise and there were no animals barking throughout the night. And when I say barking, I mean like aggressive. You know, when a dog is trying to protect its owner, that kind of aggressive barking. The entire night, scratching on our door, trying to get in. And these were big, big, big dogs. And it was just so unsettling and not something obviously we had experienced at all ever before. Sam didn't really sleep at all. And I eventually woke up in the morning and he said, pack your bags, we're leaving. We tried to go upstairs to go and get a coffee after we talked about the fact that we're probably just going to leave this hostel because he didn't sleep and I just felt really disgusting. The showers were really, really gross. They had dead cockroaches. And so we go upstairs, try and find some coffee. All of the hostel owners are sitting there and they're all smoking joints, don't speak to us, don't say anything. And then it becomes very clear that we are the only ones staying in this hostel. The only ones. Maybe there was a woman there with her dog. That's it. There is no one else staying here. And I think it then becomes very apparent, even though we've decided we're going to leave, it becomes extremely apparent that there's probably a reason why. And there is probably a reason why people are not choosing to stay here. Or they're choosing to stay here and leaving, like us. So we ended up checking out the next morning and we just said to the people, we can't stay here. I know that we've booked 2 nights with you, but we cannot do a second night here. It's just been really uncomfortable and we obviously also hate to be a pain. Like this is not something that we want to do, but we need to be able to sleep. I just don't feel very safe in the neighborhood in general. So everything was fine. We smoothed it out with the hostel owners and they were perfectly fine with us checking out early and there was no problem. And that was when we obviously then went to Casa Mura, which was the place I was talking about before. Sam had picked it out and it honestly made our stay. It really made me realize that the accommodation you pick can really make or break your trip or maybe just your mood around your trip, because I'm usually the kind of person where if you're going on holiday, for example, I don't really care as long as the accommodation has a bed and a shower and maybe somewhere to cook, if that's the vibe we're going for. Then I don't usually mind about what the accommodation's like or even necessarily where it is, as long as there's transport to and from it and I can get to things easily. But this was just unbearable and I think it put us in such an uncomfortable position. And going from that to Casa Mura made us realise that actually if we had stayed at that hostel alone and not explored more of Puerto Escondido, then we would not have had the best time. And after moving to a new accommodation, it changed the whole stay for us because suddenly it became one of our favourite places to stay. We said we'd go back if we could for a holiday. And I think your accommodation really, really plays into how you feel about a certain place. It's definitely something that we took more into consideration once moving forward after Puerto, because when we realised the contrast in that, it just really makes a difference to how you feel about a certain place. But in general, I would say Puerto is very safe if you're staying near the beach or on the beach. I think it's because that's where most touristy people are and that's where most of the bars are and the restaurants, and it feels a lot more like a community down there. I think what becomes apparent is that the town is sort of where all the locals live and it's the more industrial part of Puerto, and then the beach is kind of the more hippie, more chilled, I would say more friendly people. So if you are going, definitely stay by the beach, definitely. Now it's time for the Amelie Moran ranking system. So, food and drink, 9 out of 10. Lots of options, lots of places to go. Very cheap in the local shops. You also do have supermarkets and such a variety of things to choose from. Nightlife, 8 out of 10, really good bars, really cool clubs, and really, really good atmosphere. Everybody's just there to have a nice time. History and culture, I've said 10 out of 10. There is so much to do in Puerto, and also the community as a whole, obviously by the beach, not really referring to the town, is so lovely. And I would say the culture there is really, really welcoming, really friendly, and you just have such a nice time. Accessibility and English level, I've said 9 out of 10. Pretty much everyone speaks English, I would say. I think that obviously is playing into the whole touristy part where a lot of Americans will go there on holiday. And for accessibility, you've got taxis. They are a bit expensive or on the more expensive side, but you can negotiate, and I think they're your only mode of transport, but they do get you to and from places if you need. Safety, 7 out of 10. I'm obviously referring to our stay in the town, and sometimes on the beach, I guess, you know, there are a lot of people drinking on the beach, a lot of people doing other things on the beach, and so maybe that could be considered like a slightly unsafe environment if you're not comfortable in those kinds of situations. We didn't have any issues. And expenses, I said 7 out of 10 because it's Mexico, and I felt that the prices were very, very similar to Oaxaca and Mexico City. Not really a difference in the pricing, even though you're by the beach and it's obviously a completely different area. And overall for Puerto Escondido, I would say 8 out of 10. It's definitely somewhere I would go back to. Absolutely loved it. I think it's a really good holiday destination. You've got the beach, you've got surfing, you've got snorkeling. You can go and do things whilst you're there. Also, if you had a car or you can rent mopeds or motorbikes, I would really recommend doing that. It's not something that we did, but I really would recommend doing it because you can visit all of the beaches that are around that area and go along the coast to see different things. But I hope that this episode has helped. I hope that I've given you some sort of insight into what Puerto was like for us. We've only got one more place left in Mexico after this, and then we are on to Guatemala, which I'm really excited about. I cannot wait to talk to you about our time in Guatemala as well. But please send in your hostel horror stories. I really want to hear some. I've heard quite a few horror stories from some friends who have been traveling. I would love to hear more, maybe even read some out on the show. I think it would be quite funny. Make sure to subscribe and like this video, or comment down below any questions that you have or any comments that you have on Puerto, maybe even your experience if you've been there. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.